Hi students, I am Shivaraj Rajendran from Minds of Aspirants, and a brief introduction about me is that I've been associated with civil services exam for the past 10 to 12 years, and I have given like 9 attempts I've given, and in that 9 attempts I have continuously written 8 meets. That 8 means 6 interviews I've gone. And it was with anthropology that was I was able to go for 4 interviews. But yes, other subjects and other options like geography, psychology, public administration. I've also written mains using these options, but anthropology happened to be the one which helped me score a better result. But also the interest that I gained out of this subject was much better, much larger, maybe larger than the other subjects. So I thought I would make an answer discussion video with the question paper which had come last time, which many felt that it was a little unconventional. But that is why the purpose of making this video is that I want to show you that it is not unconventional, or it is not that unconventional. Rather, uh, if you are or if you are serious about this subject and you have a little bit of interest in this subject, you would have been able to gain far better marks than any other person. So I think we'll as we discuss this subject, you will definitely understand that this was not an unconventional subject. Rather, it was a very interesting subject. So shall we start? So we'll start. Okay, so as we saw Natufian culture, now the second question we are going to deal with the second question, which is this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. See, as that is the same point. You should not think that these are not in syllabus. These are in syllabus, but hidden behind a particular topic, which is which in theory you would have studied as something as cognitive anthropology. So under cognitive anthropology, and that is why I said this paper is little bit unconventional. That is, it is not a tough paper. They have just gone a layer behind the syllabus. That is it. But it is a very easy concept. For example, in cognitive anthropology, you would have studied something called as uh, uh, the versions were observation of color. Now, what we have in cognitive anthropology, the difference is that you are you are not observing the things outside, rather you are observing the mind. So when you observe the mind of the person, you will be able to decipher the culture. That was the basic premise of this cognitive anthropology. But the question, as I said, question arose as to how to study a mind. When you are able to study culture, means you are able to view that it is tangible. That is, you can feel that, you will be able to see that, you will be able to perceive the reality. But mind is something, or consciousness is something which you cannot perceive in reality, or it is not tangible, you cannot touch that. So scientists used the methodology of language, study of language. So they were like, when you study the language, you can study the mind. So how are you saying all these things? When they asked, they were like, there is a theory called as Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So this point is where they reached from cognitive anthropology, they went to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to justify the study of mind. Because cognitive anthropology, as you know, or as you might be aware, it is a movement in the 1950s. But the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis had been there in 1930s itself. So they have used a theory which was already present. So now what is this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is what we have to see. So in basic terms, I'll tell you what this Sapir-Whorf, it is a very interesting theory. What this theory says is that, your language or the language one speaks, so a language one speaks is responsible for the behavior of the person. That is, a person who is speaking a particular language would be behaving in a certain terms. And when you are saying that that person speaking a particular language will behave in a particular way, that actually can be extrapolated to mean that a particular culture or a particular culture is derived, or it a particular culture, you can say that the language which they speak and the culture which they have can overlap, or will be in a give and take position. And this you as you might be aware can be seen as cultural relativism also. Cultural relativism, that is, the language that you speak gives rise to a particular culture, they say. And what is the meaning of cultural particularism, as explained by Franz Boas in historical particularism, is each culture has their own history, and hence should be considered in their own terms. The next question, ironically or coincidentally, is cultural relativism. See, first is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, where you can see that the language gives rise to a behavior, which gives rise to a culture, and hence all the many in world there are so many languages. In India, so many languages are there, and hence each language will give rise to a particular culture, and you can actually extrapolate to another extent, saying that it is cultural relativism. This is the wonder of that. But Sapir-Whorf hypothesis per se says this fact. So first thing is this: language gives rise to this culture, and for an example they give. So second is that the examples they give, I will give you the examples which were in the book. For example, they quote Hopi tribe, and the English language. So, for example, in English language, there is a past, present, and a future. So, he or she did, is doing, will do. So, there are specific words. See this. There are specific words meaning that an action which is being done is in the past, is in the present, is in the future. But in the Hopi language, there is no sense, or there is no sense of time at all. So there is no past, no future, no present. They just narrate incidences. So if you see, many books would say, live in the present, live in the present. Actually, English language has these dimensions of time, which actually pulls us from into the past or in the future, and we will be struggling in the present. But Hopi, they are a tribe which can say definitely they live in the present. So this kind of for them, for if you ask a person speaking English, that person would be saying that I did that time. But when you ask a person Hopi, the past or the future does not matter. They will just narrate the incident. So they will not have a sense of time. But this is not the only thing. And the third example, the other example which they give, and this you might have seen Pyar Ka Panchnama. There was a movie, Pyar Ka Panchnama, where the heroine actually narrates that there are different shades of pink. That movie, not the, don't take the movie, but take that concept that there are shades of, if you see, there are shades of a color. So from here, darker side, you can say darker to a lighter end, to a lighter end. So this shades of colors are there, shades. Okay, but the point is that this shades of color, if you ask a person speaking in English, this is the example they've given. If you ask a person speaking in English, that person will say this is blue. But if you ask a person speaking Russian, in Russian language, this blue is actually divided based on the intensity of the color blue. So there is for a person speaking Russian, when you ask the person to narrate or ask the person to explain that blue color, the person would have a different perception than the person speaking English. So this the time or the past, present, and future is different based on the language. Same ways in the description of color. And the third important point is gender. This, for example, this you can actually very well see in the case of gender. If you see, languages have gender specific noun. What that means is that in Hindi, let us assume in Hindi, for example, moon is related to feminine gender, but at the same time, sun is related to a masculine gender. That is, sun is considered as masculine, but moon is considered as feminine. This is in Hindi. Okay, this is in Hindi. Anyone can check. Because in the Hindi language, especially Hindi language, each word or each noun has a what to say has a feminine or masculine attached to it. But when you see actually German language, this you can also check. In German language, moon, moon is described as masculine and sun is described as feminine. That is, if you ask a person to define, maybe this is the example. So if you ask a person, there is a bridge, there is a bridge which is very strong. Okay, there is a bridge which is very strong. So if you ask a person speaking Hindi, that person will actually equate this bridge with the sun. But if you ask a person speaking German, that person will actually equate this bridge with the moon. So see, the languages which you use are defining the way you perceive culture, or you define culture. The examples which we, as I told you, one is with the example of the time, Hopi culture and the language of English. The second is this shades of color which you have, which you see that the person speaking English will not have that differentiation in color, but the person speaking Russian, if you see, they have these shades of blue. So when you have these shades of blue, your perceptions of reality change. And the same way, gender, how do you define gender? In the one language, when you see a particular object is or noun is equated to feminine, and the other language opposite. When you are changing the gender of the noun in the language, immediately your description of a particular reality changes depending on the culture you are present. But how to write this answer? So this is the description of Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And but how to write the answer? That is the most interesting fact. You should not just write and narrate and leave it. It is a 10-mark question, right? It is a 10-mark question. You can write it very well. How to write that is what we'll see now. First is definition. So first is you should know what is this hypothesis. Definitely, that is what I said. Cognitive anthropology, you should have known that this is the hypothesis they use in cognitive anthropology. So Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, you have to define saying that a particular language, the language which a person uses defines the culture in which that person is present. And second, you should quote these examples. So quoting these examples, but just like you should not by you should not quote just like that. You should. So time, how it is defined in these second, that is the next thing. The next thing is color. So the next point is that first is time. So examples you have to quote. So time in that Hopi and how English language differs. And the second incidence is this related to this color which we discussed. Color, you can use other examples also, but one example which I have given. And the third is gender. So how differences in definition of nouns, words in a particular language defining a gender differs, and thereby defines the culture itself. Say you ask a person to define bridge, or you ask a person to define a mountain. So, for example, in mountain definition of Hindi is strong. That will be defined using sun, equated to sun. But if you ask a person in German, German-speaking language person to define mountain, that person will define it as a moon, which is seen as masculine there. So this kind of differences is there. So this definition should be there, and the examples which you have put. Next comes, this is what you should not stop here. This is what you should not stop here. You should say, see, the next question is cultural relativism. That is why I said it is a kind of a coincidence. You can in UPSC, it is a very important thing to have a very diverse set of points included in your answer. So here you can say about cultural relativism. Cultural relativism. You can very well say that it was Frank Bose who said that everything you can narrate, and every initial things you can say, but you can add that this Sapir-Whorf or language as a definition of culture. Actually, what does it prove? It proves that there is cultural relativism based on language. So there is a relative concept, you can say that, right? And obviously, the fourth point I said, you should use cognitive anthropology, or how it is used, this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, how it is aiding cognitive anthropology. Cognitive anthropology, as I started, it defines culture through the mind of a person by reading the mind. And how to read a mind? You read the language, and when you read the language structure, everything, you will find that a particular culture can be defined. So you can include that as well. But you should not. That is the point. You should not stop here. Fifth point. What applications does this have? Applications of this theory. Can you say that this theory in paper 2, can you bring in regionalism? To understand regionalism, can you say what is regionalism? Regionalism is a particular region feeling, or a particular region wanting to become part of a larger structure, or asserting its rights or defining its culture through a set of ethnicity, language, or religion, whichever way it can be. But can you say a region asserting its culture because of language? And this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis actually says language, culture are dependent, and hence, can you say it can be used for studying regionalism? Can you say it can be studied for regionalism? And can you conclude positively? So now you will have, see this, 1, 2. In the second point, you will have three subdivisions, and cultural relativism you have written, cognitive anthropology you have written, application where you are pointing out regionalism has ramifications. Because of this theory, you will be able to better understand regionalism, and you are giving a holistic picture. So that is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis for you. So as I said, it's a very interesting thing, but a little unconventional. But you can write all these things using the points which you have gathered in the syllabus. So you should not wonder where and what to write. Rather, you should use the things which you have studied for syllabus and write it properly. So this was Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.